I was yanked out of sleep by bass thumping through my floor at 6 in the morning, the kind of vibration you feel in your ribs before your brain even wakes up. And when I dragged myself to the bedroom window, coffee not even brewed yet, my jaw just dropped. My cattle ranch had been turned into a budget music festival overnight. Tents and RVs smeared across 40 acres of pasture. A full DJ setup parked exactly where my grandfather's old bull used to bed down, and a neat row of plastic toilets. Marching across grass, 3 generations of my family cleared by hand, and standing in the middle of my driveway, like she'd rented the place on Airbnb, was Lynette Caro, HOA president of Cedar Ridge Meadows HOA, bullhorn in hand, safety vest on, directing parking like she was running her own private Coachella. Folks I'd never seen before were twisting open my water spigots, filling coolers, washing their hands, laughing over my great space for a community event. And Lynette, orange sprayed and shining in the early light, clipboard clamped under one arm like a weapon, was waving cars into position a few feet from my cattle gates. All the authority of someone who has never in her life been chased by an 1,800-pound bull. And I remember thinking, I did not survive deployments and a divorce too. Let a woman with a laminated badge colonize my land. My name is Cole Harwood, 52, retired marine mechanic, now full-time guardian of this 40-acre ranch in Bridger County out in Redstone State, a place my grandfather carved out of scrub and rock when men still did math with fence posts in the sky. And after 20 years fixing broken military trucks in desert heat, this land became the only place my hands stopped shaking, where coffee on the porch and the sound of cattle breathing in the mist did more for my head than any prescription ever did. 3 years before the festival invasion, I'd inherited this place after my granddad passed. His name still burned into the old gatepost, and every morning I'd sit on the wraparound porch, cracked boots up on railings he'd milled himself, breathing in the smell of hay and manure and wet earth, listening to black Angus cattle, my herd, lowing softly in the distance, and I'd think, this is it. This is the payoff for everything. The sand, the noise, the insomnia, until developers discovered our quiet valley and started dropping Cedar Ridge Meadows style subdivisions like Lego sets around my property line. That's when the HOA showed up, slick brochures, shiny SUVs, and at the head of the parade, Lynette Caro, real estate agent turned suburban dictator, bleach-bright teeth and a voice sugared enough to rot wood, driving her white Escalade like a tank across my gravel, stepping out in high heels that sank into the ranch dirt while she told me, with a smile sharp as barbed wire, that my roadside fence was unsightly. My cattle were offensive to property values, and Cedar Ridge Meadows HOA now had standards. I told her, ma'am, this ranch existed long before your subdivision brochures, and she flashed a folder thick with papers, talking about easements, nuisance ordinances, community standards, like my grandfather's life work was a hobby she could find out of existence, threatening $50 a day penalties escalating to $500 if I didn't move my animals out of sight, like I was the intruder here. Thing is, I may be a mechanic and a rancher, but I'm not dumb, and I'd already heard enough horror stories to know you don't fight this kind of war with just anger and a shotgun. So I dug into Redstone State's right to farm laws, printed every line that said established agricultural operations get protected from these "you smell like cows" complaints, and I logged everything. Dates, photos, conversations. Because if there's one thing the Corps teaches you, it's that documentation wins battles. Long after the shouting's over, while I was stapling fences and receipts, my neighbor Rosa Delgado, the kind of woman who brings a casserole in one hand and courthouse intel in the other, came by and told me she'd seen Lynette haunting the county building, pulling tax rolls, boundary maps, whispering with staff, hunting for something, and right behind her, like a bad movie sidekick, Lynette's husband, Evan Caro, started creeping along my fence line at night, snapping pictures of cow pies like they were crime scene evidence. Then came the county inspection, and that's when the universe handed me my first bit of mercy, because the inspector stepping out of the white pickup in dusty combat boots was Logan Pierce, an old Marine buddy from my unit, a man who'd eaten the same sand and breathed the same diesel fumes halfway across the world. And when he saw me, he grinned and said, "Harwood, you stubborn relic. Heard some HOA queen is trying to shut down your herd." Now, Logan told me he had to play it straight, walk the fence, check the manure, do the report. But while we walked, he let me in on the bigger game, how Lynette was dating Graham Ellison, a county commissioner with real pull, and how 3 other farms had somehow failed inspections and were sold cheap to the same development company, all after mysterious compliance issues showed up. It clicked for me right there on that dusty road. This wasn't about smell or sight lines. This was about flipping land, bulldozing history, turning heritage into cul-de-sacs, and I realized I wasn't just some annoying rancher to Lynette. I was a roadblock in front of $1 million pipeline. So I did what any Marine with a grudge and a Wi-Fi connection would do. I set up trail cameras along every fence line, little silent witnesses tucked under cedar branches, and I started digging into Lynette's world the way she'd dug into mine. Found her real estate license number, cross-checked it with renovation permits, and surprise, she'd been flipping houses with unpermitted work for 2 years. So I screenshotted everything and filed an anonymous tip with the building office, then sat back and let the clock start ticking on her side of the battlefield. Meanwhile, Logan's official report came back clean, my operation fully compliant, fences solid, manure managed. So Lynette pivoted to other tactics, dragging a jittery surveyor named out to measure my boundary lines while she stood in designer boots pointing to very specific spots like she already knew what she hoped to find. Then having the nerve to interrogate my mailman about my tax bills. Looking for a week seemed she could pull on. That's when her certified letter landed in my mailbox, claiming she'd discovered a $3,200 tax issue and kindly offering to help by paying it, then foreclosing on a lien with predatory interest if I couldn't pay her back, using some obscure state statute like a knife behind her back, counting on the idea that a broke veteran wouldn't be able to scrape it together. I took every cent of my retirement, years of service distilled into a number that fit in one envelope, walked into the courthouse with boots echoing on marble, and slapped that cash on the counter loud enough that every gossip within earshot heard it, telling the clerk taxes were paid in full and that the Harwood Ranch was not, and would never be, for sale. And that payment gave me the leverage I needed to demand a full review of every survey and boundary filed on my land. That's when I hired Avery Locke, an agricultural attorney whose office smelled like old leather and burnt coffee, and whose eyes lit up when she spread my documents out across her desk. She unrolled a yellowed survey sheet from the 1960s, traced a faded line with a red pen, and showed me that the modern maps everyone relied on were wrong. Road construction decades earlier had shifted markers without updating the legal descriptions. And those 2 acres where Cedar Ridge Meadows HOA had built their grand stone entrance, legally mine, sitting right inside my original deed. Avery leaned back and told me flat, "This isn't just a boundary oops. This is potential criminal fraud. Lynette has been charging homeowners maintenance fees for a monument sitting on land that doesn't belong to them, using the mail to send those bills, which turns it into federal mail fraud territory." And suddenly, I wasn't the one trapped anymore. I was holding a loaded legal cannon pointed straight at her Escalade. At the same time, my cameras caught Evan Caro slipping around at midnight with wire cutters, actually trying to compromise my electric fence, and the footage, clear face, timestamp, cut wire, him bolting when my floodlights snapped on, went straight to Sheriff Mike Danner, a tired-looking lawman with a spine of rebar who watched the video, jaw tightening, and said, "That's not HOA drama anymore, Cole. That's criminal sabotage and attempted livestock endangerment." But Lynette wasn't just stubborn. She was escalating, flooding local media with anonymous concerns about dangerous livestock, calling commissioners with rehearsed talking points. And then she pulled what she thought was her master stroke. Glossy flyers for the Family Farm Safety Fair, a huge educational event about livestock safety and rural coexistence, complete with food trucks, bounce houses, live music, and a hands-on bull safety demonstration. And buried in the fine print was the insane part. She'd claimed the front pastures of my ranch as community common area under Cedar Ridge Meadows HOA bylaws, brandished doctored maps, and somehow hustled permits from the county to host the whole circus on my land without even asking me. The morning trucks arrived, porta potties rolling onto my grass like plastic soldiers, generators coughing diesel fumes into air that used to smell like wet soil and hay. I stepped onto my porch with my coffee and told her, clear as day, that she and her people were trespassing, and she just smiled, waved her fat folder at me, and said she had permits, insurance, safety inspections, all under the authority of Cedar Ridge Meadows HOA, and that my little hobby ranch needed to accept it was now part of a modern community. She genuinely believed she owned my piece because she'd printed some letterhead. What she didn't know was that while she was setting up speakers where my bulls used to sleep, Avery Locke was in the courthouse basement, combing through files like a bloodhound, and Noah Grayson, an investigative reporter from the Riverbend Tribune, was positioning cameras at the property line, ready to document every abuse of authority she bragged about. Avery called me, almost giddy, to tell me the real bombshell. The original Cedar Ridge Meadows HOA charter had expired 2 years ago, their renewal rejected by the State Community Association's Bureau over unresolved boundary scandals and documentation issues, and Lynette had kept right on operating anyway, collecting fees, issuing fines, signing permits, all under an HOA that legally did not exist. Suddenly, every threatening letter, every violation notice, every dollar of fees, every festival permit, open and shut pieces of a federal fraud case, especially when Avery pulled copies of a certified warning letter the state had sent Lynette 6 months earlier telling her continued operations would be considered criminal, a letter she'd deliberately hidden from homeowners. Tie that to encrypted emails Avery unearthed between Lynette and Commissioner Graham Ellison, discussing kickback percentages on development deals, and the picture changed from petty HOA harassment to full-blown corruption ring. That's when we formed a war council at my kitchen table, the same scarred wood my grandfather used to plan planting seasons, now covered in maps, affidavits, and evidence folders, with Avery laying out federal charges like playing cards, mail fraud, conspiracy, public corruption under RICO, Logan bringing boxes of questionable permit records, Sheriff Mike Danner contributing footage of trespass and sabotage, Rosa Delgado carrying a folder full of names and stories from families ripped off by bogus fines, and Noah Grayson setting up his cameras, promising the story would go statewide before the dust even settled. We decided to let the fair go forward just enough, let Lynette keep performing for the cameras, claiming power she didn't have, stacking felonies on top of arrogance, while I moved my bulls, Brimstone, Titan, and Ranger, into a fortified back pasture behind double fences and warning signs the size of billboards, with extra trailers lined up in case we had to move them fast. Festival Day felt like an invasion, cars stretching down the county road, kids spilling out in face paint and cowboy hats, people stepping over my private property signs like they were decorations, music blasting so loud my window panes rattled, and in the middle of the chaos, Lynette holding court for local news, talking about educating stubborn ranchers and bringing backward rural areas into the modern era. Every word captured in 4K by Noah's cameras and half the crowd's phones. When some parents actually noticed the trespassing issue and asked if she had my permission, she lied without blinking, claiming I'd agreed, and then backed out due to personal issues, insisting community safety trumped individual preference. And I watched that lie go straight into Noah's audio feed like a bullet going into a chamber. By midday, the fair was already breaking noise limits and capacity rules, unlicensed alcohol sloshing in plastic cups, food vendors with no health permits, porta-potty waste dumped where it had no business being, and the sheriff was quietly logging every violation while my hidden cameras caught Evan Caro trying to rig a hidden kill switch on my electric fence. Planned, premeditated endangerment of both people and livestock on video. Still, Lynette wasn't satisfied. She wanted her big moment, the incident she could wave around in court, and when she grabbed her bullhorn and announced the grand finale, a close-up visit to the overhyped dangerous bulls, and started marching 200 people toward the back pasture. I felt my stomach drop even as my mind stayed ice cold. I met them at the gate, cattle prod and emergency whistle on my belt, Sheriff Danner hovering close, and I told her that pasture was off limits, that those were breeding bulls, not petting zoo cows. But she turned to the cameras and said into her mic that the animals were completely safe, that ranchers exaggerated dangers to avoid community responsibility, then unlatched the gate herself, the metal clank echoing across the field, and invited families to crowd closer, kids on shoulders, people leaning on the fence. Brimstone lifted his head, the big black slab of him catching the light, ears cocked, nostrils flaring as this wall of unfamiliar scent and sound rolled toward him. Any rancher would have seen the red flags in an instant. Head lowering, hoof pawing, that tight coil of muscle and breath before a charge. But Lynette laughed, patted his flank like he was a pony, told the crowd to move closer, and that's when he went, not out of malice, just raw, territorial instincts surging forward at 20 miles an hour, hooves pounding the ground like a drumline from hell, dust and adrenaline exploding at once. And suddenly this neat field trip became a stampede of humans. Parents grabbing kids, tripping over each other, screaming, scrambling back through the gate while Brimstone made it absolutely clear this was his space, his sky, his dirt. I hit the whistle, stepped forward to redirect him, Sheriff Danner yelling for people to get back, and after Brimstone had driven them out of his comfort zone, he did exactly what a good bull does. Pulled up, snorted, circled back to his herd, done with the nonsense. While 200 people pressed against my fence, shaking, furious, realizing the woman who'd told them everything was under control didn't understand the first thing about the animals she'd used as props. One father, face red, yelled that Lynette had nearly gotten his children killed, shouting that she'd insisted the bulls were harmless as pets. And his words carried further than the speakers ever did. The chaos brought more cameras, more sirens, local news arriving just in time to see the aftermath. And that's when Commissioner Graham Ellison rolled up in his official car, trying to do damage control, only to find an unmarked sedan waiting, out of which stepped Agent Claire Donovan of the FBI, who'd been quietly building a case on him for months with Avery's help. She walked straight up in front of the lenses and invited him to discuss financial irregularities, and you could see the blood drain from his face. Every handshake and side deal he'd made with Lynette suddenly weighing 100 pounds. I picked up the bullhorn Lynette had dropped, and, for the first time in months, I didn't feel small or cornered. I felt steady, planted in my own dirt, and I told the crowd the truth. That Cedar Ridge Meadows HOA had been legally dead for 2 years, that Lynette had kept collecting fees, issuing fines, and signing permits with no authority, that the state had already warned her she was committing felony fraud, and she'd hidden it. And as I spoke, Avery walked up beside me with copies of the state letters, the charter records, the kickback emails, handing them to reporters like party favors at a wake. Lynette snapped, grabbing the DJ's mic and ranting about conspiracies and vendettas, accidentally blurting out that she'd taken money from developers to help move things along with stubborn homeowners, and Noah piped those audio clips straight into his cameras while big screens replayed her leading children into a bull pasture against all warnings.